Hello, it's Big Cheds. I'm back with another episode or another chapter of My Battles with Cancer, a candid patient and caregiver's memoir. I published this book originally in 2020, and then I republished it last year. I updated it, streamlined it, and it's available now on Kindle, paperback, and Audible. You can listen to the whole book there, or you can listen to the whole book here for free on YouTube. I want this book to be available to anybody who it may help. I'm a former patient. I'm a survivor now, 6 years cancer free, and my mother had cancer, and so I was a caregiver. And I write about that experience, hoping it can help other people. I've also published 2 other books, Trading Quotes and Trading Wisdom. Those are also available on Amazon, should you want to check them out. So we're in part 2. We found out about my mom's tumor, and last time we did taking care of mom. Now we have right back where I started is the next chapter. So let's go ahead and jump right on that. Right back where I started. The next milestone in mom's saga was an appointment to meet with a doctor who specialized in colon cancer. When they took the tumor out of her colon, they also took out several lymph nodes for biopsy. It was critical for us to meet this medical oncologist so we could receive mom's official results and plan for the next few months. We already had a pretty good idea of what type of enemy we were facing, but we really needed that complete diagnosis. By the time the morning of the appointment came around, and mom was feeling okay, and that eased some of my earlier concerns that she would not be strong enough to handle the visit. We pulled into the parking lot and we valeted our car, which I always thought was a nice touch. Parking your car can be a hassle, and when you're dealing with life and death issues, it's nice to have something taken off of your plate. Though I was ready to face the next step, I could tell that mom was a little bit nervous and was feeling the gravity of the moment. I was happy to be there for her, and I did my best to try to calm and guide her. Thankfully, my sister had already arranged everything ahead of time, and she made sure that all of her imaging scans and other information had been transferred from the old hospital. My sister also set up mom's insurance with the new hospital, which may seem minor, but can be a major problem if it's not done correctly. We waited in line for a few minutes before mom was given a plastic hospital bracelet, the same kind that I wore throughout my cancer journey, and that bracelet had helped to define my identity as a patient. As they were placing that bracelet around mom's wrist, I studied the faces of each of the staff members working there, and I wondered how it felt for them to interact with so many sick people on a daily basis. Part of my experience, and I imagine that for others as well with a disease like cancer, is feeling a little bit like a leper. I was carrying around feelings of shame for having a sickness or a defect. Those young and healthy people seemed almost impervious to the life and death reality of those standing on the other side of the desk. It was a strange feeling to walk away from the desk and not have that plastic bracelet on myself, a reminder that I was now walking the steps of a caregiver. After about 20 minutes or so of waiting, mom's name was called, and a nurse brought her back to take her vital signs. And then my sister showed up a little while later in her crisp white doctor's gown with a notebook containing a list of tasks that she was working on. We talked about mom's condition, and then mom came back and took a seat with us in the waiting area. The 3 of us continued for a while, trying to keep a positive and upbeat spirit during the conversation as we passed the time. While we were waiting for mom's name to be called again, a woman wearing a bandana sat down just across the room from us. And that reminded me of something that happened when I was a cancer patient. For this particular visit, I was wearing a surgical mask as I had recently been sick and I did not want to spread any germs to the other patients. While I was sitting in the waiting area and reading a book to pass the time, a woman wearing a bandana sat down across from me. And I smiled at her, forgetting that she couldn't see me, she couldn't see my mouth through the mask. After failing to greet her properly, I lowered the mask and I explained that I had smiled at her, but I had forgotten about my mask. And amazingly, she replied by saying that she knew I was smiling because she could see it in my eyes. I thought that was such a touching thing to say, and it reminded me that I was still the same person I was before, even though I felt run down and diminished. That experience also reinforced my belief that we are all connected to and constantly communicating with each other, even if we do not realize it. I find it fascinating that so much thought and feeling can be transmitted through our eyes and body language. Once Mom's name was called, we were led down a busy hallway to an examination room to wait for her new doctor. This room was basically the same one I'd sat in while receiving my cancer diagnosis, so it felt quite familiar to me. Mom sat in the chair closest to the doctor's desk, and I sat right next to her with my sister on a bench just off to the side. Today, the roles were reversed as I was sitting in the caregiver seat and my mother in the patient seat right next to the doctor. All three of us were quite anxious to meet this medical oncologist, and my sister was calm and had a poker face on and was showing strength and poise like a true professional. My mom had been relying closely on my sister's wisdom and expertise to guide her so far through this process, and I think my sister was aware of that and she acted accordingly. She never overreacted to any one piece of evidence and always seemed measured with her advice, trying to give Mom the best support she possibly could. 4 or 5 minutes of waiting was more than enough for Mom as she stood up and told us that she needed to go for a walk. She began pacing up and down the hallway outside of the doctor's office, and I was strangely comforted. That was exactly what had happened to me almost 9 months prior, when I was sitting in a similar room and waiting to hear my diagnosis. That was such a huge moment that I could not sit still. No matter how hard I tried to stay calm by breathing in a rhythm or just relaxing, my heart felt like it was going to jump out of my chest. I had to get up and move around. Now, as I watched Mom, I fully empathized with how she was feeling, unable to just sit there and calmly wait for life-changing news. As she continued to pace up and down the hallway, I again thought about something that I had thought about a lot before. What is it like for people who do not have a support network? My mother had a daughter who was a doctor and a son who had just beat his cancer, so she had a really strong support network. And she was luckier than most, to be sure. Even with my sister, my mother, and my wife all ready to be there for me when I had cancer, I still faced a difficult time managing my discomfort from the chemotherapy, and that is why I felt so deeply for those without a strong support network. During each visit to the hospital throughout my treatment, I had seen people who were seemingly there alone for their follow-up visits or even for chemotherapy sessions, and to me, they were brave. I remembered those few moments, those very few moments when I was having chemotherapy and I didn't have any company, and just how alone that made me feel. When you're hooked up to that machine and having powerful medicines pumped into your veins, it can be quite traumatic. The human company and compassion of a support system can help lessen those feelings. My mother returned from her pacing, and I flashed her a smile, wanting to give her space, but also to let her know that I was there for her. The medical oncologist walked in a little bit after that, and she introduced herself, with a strong handshake and commanding eye contact. This woman brought with her a sense of confidence and swagger, but also an earnestness that was just disarming. Overall, I was quite happy to see that she was Mom's new doctor. With her was another oncologist, a mild-mannered woman who greeted us by explaining that she was an assistant. Once the introductions were out of the way, the oncologist talked to Mom and worked to establish a rapport. Mom later told me that she felt like this doctor had a great nature about her and she had really connected with her, such that when they were speaking, Mom was only focused on her and forgot about everyone else in the room. The medical oncologist went on to reveal the biopsy results, explaining that Mom had stage 3 colon cancer. The doctor explained that she would be either facing 3 or 6 months of chemo, depending on the final tissue pathology. Then she explained the chemotherapy regimen for Mom's colon cancer, FOLFOX. This stands for folinic acid, fluorouracil, and oxaliplatin, a particular combination of drugs that are highly effective in treating colon cancer. According to Wikipedia, FOLFOX is a chemotherapy regimen for the treatment of colorectal cancer. Adjuvant treatments in patients with stage 3 colon cancer is recommended for 12 cycles every 2 weeks. Mom would be having what is called adjuvant therapy or adjuvant chemotherapy, meaning after surgery. To remove a tumor from the colon, surgery is performed, and this adjuvant chemotherapy aims to track down and kill any remaining cancer cells that may be hiding out. As soon as the doctor began going over Mom's chemotherapy regimen, the air in the room started to feel heavy. And I found myself drifting back to when my doctor explained my chemotherapy regimen. It was so incredibly hard for me to hold back emotions, so I began crying. And observing my tears, the assistant handed me a tissue. "Stop," Mom said, explaining that she was overwhelmed and didn't want to talk anymore about the chemotherapy drugs. She needed some time to process everything that had already been said. I think that perhaps Mom was also sensing the trauma that I was experiencing. After Mom was able to gather some composure, the doctor continued to explain her plan for treating Mom's cancer. And observing this dialogue for a few minutes, I was impressed with the way the doctor was able to calm down Mom and talk her through the process. Based on my amateur, this is important to point out, my amateur research, I had thought that Mom would be having local chemotherapy rather than systemic. Systemic is when the drugs go to every part of your body versus local, where the medicine only goes to a specific area. According to the NIH, or National Institute of Health, systemic chemotherapy is treatment with anti-cancer drugs that travel throughout the blood to cells all over the body. Certain cancers are treated with local chemotherapy, such as is outlined in this article from breastcancer.org. Localized chemotherapy directs chemotherapy medication into liver tumors, avoiding effects to healthy organs. Citation. The doctor explained that Mom would indeed need systemic chemotherapy, as they wanted to make sure that they went after the cancer cells wherever they might be in her body. And due to the size of her tumor and the sheer number of enlarged lymph nodes around it, they were concerned that it might have already started to spread. The doctor mentioned that they wanted her to have another chest scan in 2 months to see if the cancer had indeed spread. The doctor explained that although Mom would have some hair loss, it would be more like hair thinning, and this gave Mom some comfort to know that she would not go through what I did. She would not end up being bald. The oncologist also explained the other potential side effects of chemotherapy, such as neuropathy. She explained that mom would likely experience some neuropathy, but it would not be as severe as what I had to deal with. I thought that statement was interesting since I never actually had any neuropathy, which I attribute to using CBD and exercising when I had the energy. As the doctor continued to go over the side effects, I was pleased to see that mom was doing a lot better than she had been before. Then, the strangest thing happened. The medical oncologist comforted mom by saying that her chemotherapy would be nothing like what I had to go through. And then my sister chimed in saying, "Oh yeah, mom, your chemotherapy will be nothing like his." And the assistant doctor agreed. It was such a strange feeling to hear that I had apparently gone through a vicious and ultra powerful chemotherapy regimen. And it was especially strange now, given that I was on the other side and had been progressing quite well with my recovery. The way the doctors had talked to mom, the way the doctors had talked about my chemotherapy regimen as a way to comfort mom left me feeling dirty and damaged and wondering what had really happened to me. I do not think I will ever forget that feeling. That being said, I was proud to know that I had survived something that they were describing in such harsh terms. It did give me some comfort to know that mom would not have to face anything like what I went through. Now that we knew that her course of treatment would be less drastic than mine, I was able to calm down a little bit and just let things work out. After receiving this really heavy news from the doctor of colon cancer and potentially 6 months of chemotherapy, mom and I decided to stop by the cafeteria to decompress and to have a quick meal. As we were standing in line, mom and I noticed a young girl with 2 large neck tumors being pushed around in a stroller by her parents. She told me that seeing this child suffering so badly reminded her to count her blessings. Life could always be worse. Personally, I was struck by how this child continued to play like any other little girl, completely oblivious to the grave problems that she and her family were facing. And that reminded me of the purity of a child's nature. When we're young, all we know is playing, and even when something as grave as cancer is happening, all we know is playing. The child's parents, they looked worn, beaten down, and dazed, barely making it through the day and just hoping that their daughter would survive. Quote, "While having lunch with my mother in the cafeteria, we watched a 3-year-old girl and her parents. The girl had 2 large tumors sticking out and almost doubling the size of her neck. Her parents looked despondent, but she was playing like any other kid with a pure spirit." August 6th, 2018 at Big Cheds. There it is. That is the end of the chapter. The next chapter is preparing for chemotherapy again, because we're starting to prepare for mom's chemotherapy. This is my battles with cancer, a patient and caregiver's candid memoir. I was a cancer patient with stage 3 lymphoma, and then I was a caregiver for my mom when she was diagnosed with cancer. And I write about my experience in this book. You can get the whole thing for free here on YouTube at Cheds Trading. I want anyone who it might help to be able to get access to this book, and that's why I'm doing it. You can get it on Amazon as well, Kindle, paperback, and audiobook, along with my other books. I've previously published Trading Wisdom and Trading Quotes. Let's get that there. Trading Wisdom and Trading Quotes. And that's what this is, My Battles with Cancer. I will be back with another chapter soon. So thank you for listening.